Hey everyone, today I am doing a commission job. I'm going to be building a couple of patch panels for, got some of my beer in there looks like. I'm doing a couple of patch panels for a guy that has a 64 Riviera, but the processes I'm using are pretty much universal. They'll work for any car you're missing. You got rusty metal and you want to just patch panel it, because if you have rusty metal parts on a car that you can't get parts for, you're going to have to make the part or know somebody that can. So what I'll show you is I'm going to show you the part, and this is a body mount that someone took the time to fill with foam, expanding foam insulation, and undercoated it. It's nice when they do that. And then on the outside here, this is actually, this part here actually goes behind where the seat goes. It's actually part of the reinforcement right through here. This kind of comes down and around, and it actually sits kind of like this inside. So this is actually the driver's side rear, and this comes down right from right where in front of the rear tire well is, and comes down and around, and this is actually part of where the inner structure welds to that outer structure, and right here is a body mount. And these are really famous in the Riviera world for rusting out, because there's no drain hole here, and it gets plugged with dirt and debris, and it just holds water. And especially when they use the rubberized undercoating that they do heavily on these older cars, it seals it all off and gives no way for that water to escape, or the dirt that ends up forming. So it'll end up just rotting away. Like both of mine on my 64 Riviera were completely rotted. Now, I didn't have anybody using spray foam insulation to hide damage. I had somebody using masking tape, just regular paper masking tape, and Bondoing over everything, and they barely spot welded sheet metal on my quarter panels, and then pop riveted the bottom to the inner structure of the quarter panel, and just huge thick body filler over everything. So but I had to make the body mounts, because there was nothing in any model car that even remotely looked like this body mount. So I had no choice. I had to make it by hand. And because I've made one by hand, and the guy knew about it, he asked me if I would make him one. So that's what I'm going to do. If you can see, there's some like stamped sections here, and where he cut it off, he just got to like the end of that section, and you can see that this piece here actually has been replaced at another time, because you can see the welds. That's not factory, that's a weld, and that's a weld all the way along there. So this is actually supposed to just be a flat piece with those stampings, so I'm going to have to add those stampings in, but that's not too bad. That's just the very end. So what I did was I took a piece of masking paper. This is just green masking paper, and I laid it up on here, and then I used magnets Just stuck the magnets on there, adjusted the paper. I had a big square piece, and I adjusted the paper and got magnets. These little magnets were on my refrigerator, and they're rare earth magnets, so they stick really good. And I just used magnets and stuck some magnets, and some of these are magnets from old magnetic sockets and magnetic screwdriver bit holders that broke and wore out, and so I just kind of maneuvered the paper around. I'm not doing it exactly here, but just to show you how I did it. And then I just kind of stuck it down on there, and then I flipped it over, and then I traced around the outside, and then when I cut extra so that when I cut the sheet metal, I'm going to leave that extra bit, so that what I like to do is when I do patch panels like this, like what I like to do is with patch panels like this where I'm making patterns, is I like to leave quite a bit of extra on the outside, because when you're adding, when you're making a new patch panel, sometimes like this one is another patch panel that I'm also replacing, because this piece has already had patchwork done to it. So I'm never 100% sure how exactly how big the piece has to be. So I would rather pad that with extra metal, because you can always take the metal away. It's harder to put it back when you don't have it there in the first place, and then you'd have to cut another strip, and then you're doing extra welding, and you're doing extra grinding to grind them flat and all that stuff, because I always when I do patch panels like this, I always butt weld them so that there's no overlap. So this piece here is the first part. This is the inside of the trunk floor on that car, and then I still have to make this bottom outside structure that's a body mount for the back of the car. I'm going to have to probably make this in a couple of different pieces. That's how I did it with my car, and it turned out great. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing with this one here, is making it out of a couple of pieces, and then I'll just kind of piece it together and weld it together and grind it all smooth. And then that way, like, once I'm done, I can prime and paint the inside of it, so that the only parts that you have to really worry about hitting with more rust preventative stuff is where you've spot welded it back onto the car. And then when you butt weld all this, you'll have access to all of that to be able to spray some kind of rust preventative or paint it, or whatever. But usually when you butt weld something together like that, it usually gives you a really nice finish, and you can get a pretty decent flat weld out of it. The sheet metal I'm replacing that with, I had him get some 18 gauge, so it's going to be plenty strong. I mean, this is some pretty thick, stout stuff. A lot of times with these older 60s era cars, the sheet metal is usually like between an 18 gauge and a 16 gauge, but you can always get away with an 18 gauge and have plenty of strength out of the part, and you won't have too many worries about it not holding up to the weight of the car or any kind of torque or anything like that, depending on where the panel's at. And it'll be like, if you look at the side cut, and actually that's probably not even a great side cut because that's right through that weld. If you look at the side cut right through here where this is all good metal, you can see that it's probably between a 16 and an 18 gauge sheet metal. So I think you're totally safe if you're in the 18 gauge area for making a patch panel. And it's not going to be, you know, you get into the 16 or 14 gauge sheet metal and you're really going to work to like shape that stuff. So using like a 16 or an 18 gauge, 16 gauge will be harder to work than 18 gauge because it'll be thinner or thicker. With sheet metal, the higher the number, the thinner the gauge. So if you see, like, say your local hardware store sells 20 gauge or 22 gauge sheet metal, small sheet metal chunks, that would be more along the lines of what modern cars would have. And even some modern cars have 24 gauge sheet metal panels. So that would be something that you would have in a modern car, but you wouldn't really want to use that in your classic car because the sheet metal is just not gonna hold up as well. It'll probably work, and it'll probably work for a while, but you're not doing yourself any favors when you're using too thin of a sheet metal. You always try to add sheet metal that's about the same thickness when you're replacing it. So the tools that I'm going to use to make this patch panel are readily available at any big box tool store. Even some of the big box hardware stores will have a lot of these tools. Like, I'm going to use air pressure type tools, so I'm going to use air tools for my cutting out of the patch panels and stuff. Don't let that deter you. You can use electric grinder, cut off wheels like this, and I may even use this. I've got some die grinders and stuff to use too, but even this, just be mindful that these things throw a ton of sparks, so kind of pay attention to where the sparks are going so you don't catch your garage on fire or something else on fire. The die grinders, air die grinders, tend to throw a little less sparks in a smaller pattern and don't shoot them quite as far as those electric grinders do, electric cutters do. You can also get air nibblers. They work pretty good. I find that the air nibblers kind of don't cut as straight. You kind of have to have something there to kind of guide them along, because they tend to, any small variation in your cut and it'll start going a totally wrong direction than what you want it to go, and take off more material out of the patch panel than what you want to take out. So they're a good second choice in my opinion. You can use benchtop shears. Those work pretty good. I'm dealing with a pretty good chunk of sheet steel there, and I don't think I have the room to get it over to my benchtop shear to cut it efficiently enough. So I'm probably going to end up using the die grinder just to cut the small chunks of that metal out. But even like the shaping of it that I'm going to do, like this area here, I'm going to try to add that to the patch, this part of the patch. I'm going to try to add that to this part of the patch here, so that this is all connected in one piece. And then I'll probably have like this part as part of that same patch, and then I'm probably going to have to cut this as a second piece, this kind of side section here as a second piece, so that because I don't think that I can shape it quite good enough to be worth trying. It'll just be easier if I cut this whole section here out of flat stock, out of flat sheet metal, and then cut this part of it that kind of grows, kind of goes up from the flat lip there. and I'll just cut that out of a second piece and shape that and get that to fit and weld it up and grind it, and it'll look like it's one piece, even though it's a couple of pieces. Like I could probably heat it up, like doing this lip here. I'm going to heat that up, and I'm just going to use good old propane torch. That's all I'm going to use to heat that sheet metal up, because there's no sense. These are so much cheaper to run than busting out my oxyacetylene torch. The torch, the big torch, that'll heat it up a lot faster, but getting those things filled, you know, it's not real cheap, and these things are fairly inexpensive. So that's what I'm going to use to heat the lip. That's what I'm going to use to heat this lip up. And then what I'll do is I'll heat it up, and then I can bend it with just a body hammer and a dolly probably. I might use my bench vise, but I should be able to shape that pretty easily. When you heat that metal up, it'll stretch pretty good for you. So I should be able to heat that up and stretch that. And then this whole top area here up to this lip is all going to be one piece, and it'll look a lot cleaner that way. And then just the only extra welding I'll have to do is that side panel that I'll have to make, and I'll have to figure out exactly where in this missing section that it kind of comes down. And I can't remember. It's been a couple of years since I made the one for my car. So, but it's good that I have my car that I can look at and, you know, gauge where stuff's changed, and I can critique my own work and then make that patch panel just that much better. And because I've already made one, I think this one's going to go a little bit faster than doing it for the first time. Doing it for the second time, you always do something faster. So got some rare earth magnets that forget where I got them from, but they're super strong. They'll help hold the paper down. So we can make the pattern. Need a stronger, thicker one. Over here, it seems to be a little stronger. I think I'm going to need a couple more here. Got another small little stack of them. These weaker magnets, they work pretty good for the flat areas, but you need kind of something a little stronger for those curves and stuff. Yeah, I'm going to have to grab my other stack. Alright, I'm back. I'm just kind of feeling underneath the paper here, trying to see where that seam is. Like this wrinkly section in here, that's actually supposed to be flat, but there's no metal there, it's all gone. I can stick some around that edge, even though we're not cutting that part out as one piece. It's still got such thick undercoating on some of these parts here. I'm having problems getting even the rare earth magnets to stick good. And once I kind of get it roughed in, roughly where I need it to be, I'll take just use a Sharpie marker and kind of go around the edges, and you'll have to kind of mash the paper down a little bit by hand too. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You're not going for Rembrandt art or anything like that. Just a lot of this isn't even part of it. I think it's cut straight across right there in that corner. Kind of mashing the paper down a little bit, trying to feel that the edges of stuff of that piece. If your fingers are dirty enough, you can actually kind of rub your finger along it and just make a dirt line a little bit, but my fingers aren't nearly that dirty yet. Now we get into the missing section in here. What we'll do is we're going to move over to the front here. We can get, I know that this section's not there, but like, you would think that you would want to cut those wrinkles and, overlap it or something, but you actually don't want to do that. You want to leave those wrinkles, because when you flatten it out, that'll be the size of the patch that you actually have to cut. Those are all spots where if you were making this all out of one piece, every wrinkle is a spot where you have to, every wrinkle like this around a corner is a spot where you would have to shrink the metal. And now that we've got, a little bit more right there. Kind of guess on certain sections of it. And then what I like to do, I like to kind of trace around a little bit where that bend is. And there's also going to be a bend down here, so we'll kind of trace around there too. Gives us an idea of where our lip is going to be and how big. And you can kind of guess a little bit, even though some of that section's missing, you can kind of guess a little bit where that lip will be, and then also where the top part will come down. And it's going to be underneath the car, but that's no excuse to not do a decent looking job. But I like, when I do a patch panel, I like to have it look like it's factory, where you look underneath the car and you can't tell anything's been done, or at least somebody with a trained eye is going to be the one that has to see it. But get all our magnets off now. And there's our pattern for our patch panel. Now, of course, I'm not going to leave it a crooked line like that. I'm going to square that line up. And then this gives us an idea of where our bends or where our extra cuts are going to have to be. And then when you look on this part of the panel, you can see right along here that that's all cut. So there's no part there, that's all open. Probably one of the areas where the dirt and the moisture can get in. But that's something that once we get our pattern all cut out, of course we're gonna pad it a little bit with extra material. And then what I'll do is I'm probably gonna end up cutting this right straight across, which is what it looks like it is anyways. You can kind of freehand it a little bit, just as long as you're kind of following along. Again, you're not creating Rembrandt there, you're just and I believe that this actually is cut straight across here. But we'll get to that part when we get to it. That's our pattern. And that's the part that we got to cut out and make. Now all we got to do is cut our pattern out, give ourselves a little bit of padding in case our measurements aren't quite perfect. And I'm probably padding more than I even need to, but I'd rather have too much sheet metal instead of not enough. Now, got this, which is the floor of the trunk. And I made these marks here because that's where my bends, my little bends will be. And then we got that piece there, and this is the top, or the body mount underneath. And more than likely I'm going to end up cutting this part out here and making that a separate piece of metal that I can manipulate a little easier than trying to make that all out of one piece in 18 gauge. But it'll weld up good, and you grind it, smooth it out, and it'll look just like the factory. And I can also transfer over like that hole right there, which I believe that's not where the body mount goes. I believe the body mount actually sits right here, but I'm not 100% sure exactly where that hole is located because there's nothing there. So I'm probably going to leave that just full and let him locate that hole. Because generally what I would do is if that part of the body mount was there, I would drill that hole out, and then I would weld a nut on the back side inside of this cavity. I would have a nut already welded on there, so when you go to mount your body mount, put your body mount back in there and actually mount this back into the car, you just use a long bolt and washer and a new body mount and put it right in there. But I don't know where that's supposed to be at. Now, you're not going to be able to get anything to stick to this sheet metal because it always comes with like a coating of oil on it. So what I like to use is a little bit of acetone, and put your gloves on because that stuff soaks right through your skin and goes right into your bloodstream, and it is not good for you. But the great thing is it evaporates super fast. See how nasty and dirty it is? Still, that's the third wipe, but I'm still pulling stuff off of it. Now you also want to wear some cut-proof gloves. Like you can get a pair of these. These work pretty good because sheet metal is super sharp. When they cut it like this, it'll cut right through some regular gloves. If you just have some cotton gloves or something, you might be okay, but it'll cut through them cotton gloves pretty fast. We won't need them right away just to tape our patterns, transfer our patterns over.
Yeah, you'll have to wipe it off. You'll have to wipe it off with acetone, or you can use alcohol. You can use lacquer thinner, but you'll have to wipe it off because the Sharpie markers won't transfer over through that oil. Now, I always like to use the edge of the panel so that I can cut the least amount possible. So like I'll line it up with the edge, and then that uses as much of that chunk of sheet metal as you can. You can also use your rare earth magnets. That actually works pretty good. And we don't have to be super exact here because got all that extra material we're going to be cutting off. So we've got plenty of material to work with. And there's our first piece. Really what we want to do is we want to cut this into smaller pieces so that it's easier to work with instead of having to work with a whole 4 foot by 4 foot chunk of this stuff. We can use a smaller chunk, and then we can kind of whittle it down and make it a little bit easier to deal with. And since we're already here to it, trace around it a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect again because we got all that extra we're cutting off too. I'm actually going to leave it right where it sits. I'm going to use my air nibblers, I believe, to cut through this stuff. They should cut through pretty easy. And then that way it's going to shoot all them little barbs that come out of the nibbler. It's going to shoot them right here, so I don't have to track them all throughout my garage. That's the one bad thing about using air nibblers. It shoots them little barbs out because it's chomping away at the sheet metal. But it does go through the stuff pretty fast, and I can clean up the edge. As long as you kind of follow along that line, you should be fine. Like I said, I'm going to use my air nibbler. Got this right at Harbor Freight. I think it was right around 20 or 30 bucks. But it's going to be loud. So now that we got our patterns all cut out in sheet metal, what we want to do is we want to transfer those small little body lines that are in the trunk. We want to transfer those over to our patch panel. We kind of want to give it a remember, we've added a little bit onto that, so we actually have to go back kind of far. I actually transferred that weld, but that's actually not needed. So all I have to worry about is transferring over how it comes down and around so that it'll match up with the trunk pan that's still in the car. Now most people, they would just cut it straight across, you know, fill in whatever, and then put a trunk mat in the back, and you only see it if you pull the trunk mat out. But it's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to add those body lines in there, and then I'm going to leave all this extra in here so that he can trim to fit, so it fits up flush with that wheel well that's in the back there. I'm going to make a patch panel for the floor, the trunk floor. And it's got these recesses in it. So I'm going to hammer those out real quick. What I'm doing is I have two marks laid out here, and I'm smacking the inner mark, and I'm resting the outer mark on the edge of this dolly here. So it kind of gives me a nice little edge. Nothing too fancy. We just want to match up that body line that they have stamped in there. It looks like I did it the wrong way.
think that matches up pretty good. Now, this one can still be a bit wider. So they match up fairly decent. This one needs to be a little deeper, but I think the front one actually matches up pretty good. See how good that front one matches up? This one needs to be a little bit deeper. That's better. Much better. That's one patch panel ready to go. Now they'll have some finishing stuff they'll have to do, but when it gets welded in, and there'll be plenty of extra so they can maneuver around. You want to give, because I'm not welding it in, so I want to give as much extra as I can. So as you see, it's not perfect, but it will definitely do. If you like my channel and you like what I do, give a like and subscribe and hit the little notification button.
That way, anytime I post a new video, you'll know.